It was late afternoon when the traffic lights flickered from green to yellow. The street was calm, almost empty, the kind of quiet that made everything feel ordinary. A black car slowed down smoothly and pulled over to the side of the road. No sudden movements, no resistance, just compliance. Inside the car sat Bruce Lee, calm, focused, and aware. He had faced pressure before, but something about this moment felt different. The side mirror reflected flashing red and blue lights, growing brighter by the second. The police officer stepped out of his cruiser with heavy footsteps. His posture wasn't relaxed. His hand hovered close to his weapon, even though there was no visible threat. As he approached the driver's window, his eyes narrowed, not with professionalism, but with judgment. "License and registration," the officer demanded, his voice sharp and impatient. Bruce Lee complied without a word. His movements were slow, deliberate, respectful. He understood how quickly a simple situation could spiral out of control. Years of discipline had trained him not just in physical control, but emotional restraint. The officer glanced at the documents, then back at Bruce Lee's face. Something changed. His tone shifted. His stance tightened. What should have been a routine check suddenly felt charged with tension. "Step out of the vehicle," the officer said. Bruce Lee paused, not in defiance, but caution. He took a breath, then opened the door and stepped onto the pavement. His hands were clearly visible. His posture was calm, yet the air felt heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Cars slowed as they passed. A few pedestrians stopped, sensing something was wrong. Bruce Lee noticed their eyes, their concern, their uncertainty. He had done nothing wrong, but in that moment, innocence didn't seem to matter. The officer began asking rapid questions, barely waiting for answers. Each word carried suspicion. Each glance carried hostility. This wasn't about traffic anymore. It was about power. Bruce Lee remained silent, steady, grounded. He knew reacting emotionally would only make things worse. Still, deep inside, he felt the injustice building, the quiet realization that he was being judged not by his actions, but by bias. The tension thickened with every second. No one knew it yet, but this routine traffic stop was about to become a moment that would change lives forever. And it was only the beginning. The officer circled the car slowly, his boots scraping against the pavement as if he wanted everyone nearby to hear him. His eyes never left Bruce Lee. They weren't curious. They weren't cautious. They were suspicious, heavy with assumption. "Where are you coming from?" the officer asked. Bruce Lee answered calmly, his voice steady and respectful. There was no attitude, no challenge, just facts. But the response didn't satisfy the man in uniform. Instead, it seemed to irritate him. "Why are you in this area?" the officer pressed, stepping closer than necessary. The question didn't make sense. It wasn't illegal to be there. Bruce Lee noticed the subtle shift, the way the questions were no longer about a traffic violation, but about justifying presence, about belonging, about control. Bruce Lee had spent his life mastering discipline, not only of the body, but of the mind. He understood something critical in that moment. This situation was no longer logical. It was emotional, and emotions, when mixed with authority, could become dangerous. The officer's voice grew louder, his words sharper. Each sentence carried an edge of disrespect that cut deeper than insults ever could. People nearby began to notice. A woman slowed her steps. A man across the street pulled out his phone, instinctively sensing that this interaction wasn't normal. Bruce Lee kept his hands visible. He nodded when spoken to. He avoided sudden movement. Every action was calculated to de-escalate. Still, the officer's behavior escalated, as if calm itself offended him. "Don't look at me like that," the officer snapped. Bruce Lee hadn't changed his expression. He hadn't stared. He hadn't spoken out of turn. Yet somehow, even his silence was treated as a threat. This was the moment Bruce Lee understood the truth. The officer had already made up his mind. Not based on evidence, not based on behavior, but based on bias. The air felt tight, like it was running out of oxygen. The officer shifted his weight again, one hand resting closer to his weapon now. That single gesture sent a chill through everyone watching. Bruce Lee noticed it instantly. So did the bystanders. Years of training echoed in his mind. Not lessons about fighting, but lessons about awareness. About reading energy. About knowing when danger was approaching before it arrived. The officer asked another question, then another, each one faster, harsher, more aggressive. He wasn't listening anymore. He was building a narrative, one where he was justified, no matter what happened next. Bruce Lee's heart rate increased, but his expression didn't change. Inside, he felt the injustice burning. Outside, he remained composed. He knew that any sign of frustration could be twisted, used against him. A police radio crackled. The sound was sharp, sudden, jarring. The officer flinched, then seemed angrier, as if the interruption reminded him that others might be watching, recording, judging. Across the street, a phone camera was now clearly visible. Another appeared. The atmosphere shifted slightly. The power was no longer absolute. Bruce Lee sensed it. The officer sensed it too. And that's when the officer made a mistake. Instead of calming down, he leaned further into aggression. His voice rose. His posture stiffened. His bias, once subtle, was now undeniable. This traffic stop was no longer routine. It was no longer private. And it was quickly becoming something the officer would never escape. The tension had crossed a line, and everyone present could feel it. The silence that followed felt heavier than shouting ever could. Bruce Lee stood beside his car, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the road. Every sound seemed amplified. The distant hum of traffic, the soft buzz of a phone recording, the faint crackle of the officer's radio. Time slowed, stretching each second into something uncomfortable and dangerous. The officer took a step closer. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he ordered, even though Bruce Lee's hands hadn't moved. Bruce Lee nodded slightly, raising them a bit higher to remove any doubt. His face remained calm, but his senses were sharp. He could feel the tension radiating from the officer, not fear, but something worse. Insecurity mixed with authority. Ego backed by power. This was the most unpredictable kind of danger. The officer's breathing had changed. It was faster now, uneven. His jaw tightened, as if he were fighting something inside himself. Bruce Lee noticed every detail. Years of discipline had trained him to read energy before action. And the energy in front of him was unstable. "Why are you so calm?" the officer snapped suddenly. The question caught a few bystanders off guard. Calmness, in that moment, had become suspicious. Bruce Lee understood the irony immediately. Any reaction would be wrong. Silence would be wrong. Calm would be wrong. "I'm cooperating," Bruce Lee replied quietly. The officer scoffed, pacing once again. "You think you're better than this?" That wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Bruce Lee felt a tightening in his chest. Not fear, but the weight of injustice. He had done nothing except exist in front of the wrong person at the wrong time. The realization settled in slowly, like cold water. Across the street, a small crowd had formed. No one intervened, but no one left either. Phones were now clearly raised. The presence of witnesses changed the air. It added pressure. Accountability. The officer noticed. "You can put those phones away," he shouted toward the crowd. No one moved. That's when the situation shifted from tense to volatile. The officer returned his focus to Bruce Lee, stepping into his personal space. Too close. Unnecessary. Intentional. Bruce Lee stood his ground, not out of defiance, but because stepping back might be misinterpreted. "Turn around," the officer said. Bruce Lee hesitated for half a second, not to resist, but to understand. "Am I being detained?" he asked calmly. The question triggered something. The officer's face flushed. His authority had been challenged, politely, legally, but publicly. He didn't answer. Instead, his hand moved again toward his weapon, resting there just a moment longer this time. A gasp came from the crowd. Bruce Lee saw it. Everyone saw it. This was no longer about control. It was about saving face. Bruce Lee slowly turned his body sideways, careful, deliberate, showing compliance without surrendering awareness. His mind raced, not with panic but with calculation. He knew sudden movements could be misread. He knew words could be twisted. The margin for error had disappeared. The officer barked another command, louder now, harsher. His voice cracked slightly, a sign of emotional overload. He was losing control, and that loss made him dangerous. Bruce Lee's training echoed in his thoughts. Stay centered. Stay present. Fear spreads when discipline breaks. A police car passed at the end of the street without stopping. The officer glanced at it, then back at Bruce Lee. Something flickered in his eyes, frustration, maybe even regret, but it vanished just as quickly. The crowd murmured softly. Someone whispered, "This isn't right." The officer heard it. "Enough," he shouted, raising his voice higher than before. The word hung in the air, sharp and final. Bruce Lee remained still, calm, grounded. He had done everything right. But he could feel it now, the moment approaching. The invisible edge where logic ends and impulse takes over. This was the point of no return. Not because of anything Bruce Lee had done, but because the officer had already decided how this story would go. And in trying to prove his authority, he was about to make a choice that would destroy everything he had built. The tension peaked, and the next moment would change everything. Everything happened in fragments, not fast, but sharp, like glass cracking one line at a time. The officer's voice cut through the air again, louder than before, no longer controlled. Commands overlapped. Instructions contradicted each other. The authority he tried to project was slipping, and everyone could feel it. Bruce Lee stood still, his body relaxed but alert. He understood something critical now. This moment was no longer about compliance. It was about perception, about how the officer felt he was being seen, watched, judged, exposed. The phones were still raised. The crowd had grown quieter, sensing that something irreversible was approaching. Silence returned, not peaceful, but pressurized. Turn all the way around. Now, the officer demanded. Bruce Lee began to comply, slowly shifting his weight, careful with every inch of movement. He knew that hesitation could be interpreted as resistance, but sudden motion could be framed as threat. The balance was impossibly thin. Then it happened. The officer took a step back, not in caution, but confusion. His eyes widened briefly, as if his mind had jumped ahead of reality. He raised his voice again, louder, sharper, filling the silence with noise as if noise could cover doubt. "Don't move." Bruce Lee froze mid-motion, hands still visible, exactly where they had been the entire time. For a split second, no one breathed. This was the breaking point. Not a single action, but the collapse of judgment. The moment when fear disguised itself as authority. When bias overpowered training. The officer made a decision. It was quick, emotional, final. A sound echoed across the street. Not described, not shown, but unmistakable in its impact. The crowd reacted instantly. Gasps, shouts, phones shaking in hands that hadn't expected to capture history. Bruce Lee fell to the ground. Not dramatically, not violently, just suddenly, as if gravity had claimed him without warning. The officer stood frozen, eyes locked on what he had just done. For the first time since the stop began, his face showed something real. Shock. Not the shock of danger avoided, but the shock of consequence realized. "Get back," he yelled toward the crowd, his voice cracking now. "Everyone get back." No one listened. Someone screamed for help. Someone else shouted that it was all on camera. The officer looked around wildly, as if the world had betrayed him, as if reality had changed the rules without permission. Bruce Lee lay still, breathing shallow but steady. His face showed pain, but also something else. Awareness. Even now, he remained present, focused, alive. Sirens began to rise in the distance. The officer reached for his radio with shaking hands. His words rushed and unclear. He wasn't commanding anymore. He was reacting, trying to regain control of a situation that had already escaped him. Bystanders stepped closer, not aggressively, but instinctively. Humanity overriding fear. Phones continued recording, capturing every angle, every second, every mistake. "This didn't have to happen," someone said aloud. The words cut deeper than accusation. The officer heard them. He looked down at Bruce Lee again, then at his own hands. The weight of the moment pressed down hard. Training manuals, protocols, Warnings. All ignored in a single choice. Backup arrived quickly now. Another cruiser. Then another. Officers stepped out and froze when they saw the scene. The crowd, the cameras, the man on the ground, the shaken colleague at the center of it all. Questions were asked. Orders were given. The atmosphere changed instantly. This was no longer a traffic stop. It was an incident. And incidents have records, witnesses, consequences. As Bruce Lee was carefully attended to, one of the arriving officers pulled the original officer aside. His tone was calm but firm, professional, unforgiving. What happened, he asked. The officer tried to explain, tried to justify, tried to find words that would make sense of a moment driven by impulse instead of reason. But the truth was already spreading faster than his explanation ever could. Because this time, the cameras didn't lie. And the career that officer had built over years, it had just reached its end, even if he didn't fully realize it yet. The point of no return had been crossed, and there was no going back. The moment the backup officers arrived, the atmosphere shifted. What had been a tense, chaotic scene turned into a controlled, official response. But control didn't erase what had happened. It only made it clearer. The crowd remained, phones still raised, eyes wide, refusing to leave. Everyone understood that this was not just an ordinary stop anymore. This was evidence. The officer who fired the shot stood off to the side, hands trembling slightly, his face pale. He tried to maintain his posture, to keep the image of authority, but the truth had already started to break through his mask. The first backup officer approached cautiously. His voice was steady, but not harsh. "Sir, step back. Stay where you are." The officer complied, but he did it like a man forced into a corner. His pride was wounded, and the wound made him unstable. Bruce Lee was now being attended to by paramedics. He was alive, but injured. His breathing was uneven, his eyes still open. His focus was fading, but not his awareness. Even in pain, he remained observant, watching everything around him. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Someone shouted, "He didn't do anything." Another voice called, "This is racist." The officer's eyes snapped toward the crowd. His face twisted into anger, and for a moment it looked like he might lash out again. But he didn't. He was too aware of the cameras now, too aware of the fact that the world was watching. That was when the truth began to reveal itself. One of the bystanders, a young man with a steady hand, approached a police officer and said, "I have the video. It's all here." The officer nodded and took the phone. He watched the footage silently, his expression changing with every second. It was clear, sharp, undeniable. The footage showed the entire interaction, the officer's aggressive tone, the unnecessary intimidation, the biased attitude, and the moment the shot was fired. There was no justification, no threat, no reason for the officer's actions. The officer who had fired the shot tried to speak, to explain himself. But his words came out hollow, weak, defensive. "I thought he was reaching for something," he stammered. The officer watching the video didn't look convinced. He shook his head slowly, as if he was disappointed. Not because he didn't believe the shooter, but because the truth was now undeniable. Another officer approached with a body cam. The footage from the body cam matched the phone recording. The same timeline, the same actions, the same moment. The truth was no longer a matter of opinion. It was a matter of evidence. As the officers watched the footage, the crowd's anger grew. The energy shifted from shock to outrage. People were no longer just watching, they were reacting. They were feeling the injustice in their bodies, the way it made them think of their own experiences, the way it made them realize how quickly power could become violence. The officer who had fired the shot was asked to hand over his weapon. He hesitated. It was a small moment, but it was significant. It showed that he still believed he could control the narrative. He still believed he could own the truth. But the truth was already owning him. He placed the weapon on the ground, slowly, like a man surrendering not just his gun, but his identity. The lead officer spoke in his radio, voice low but firm. "We need internal affairs. We need this documented. We need everything recorded." It was a statement of protocol, but also a statement of consequence. Because once internal affairs is involved, nothing stays hidden. The crowd began to chant, not loudly but steadily. The words were simple but powerful. Justice. Accountability. Not again. Bruce Lee, despite his injury, heard all. His eyes moved slowly, taking in the scene. He wasn't just a victim in that moment. He was a symbol, a reminder that even the strongest people can be targeted, and that even the most disciplined can be pushed to the edge by injustice. The officer who fired the shot watched the scene around him. The cameras, the witnesses, the evidence, the people who would never forget this moment. For the first time, he understood that his actions had consequences far beyond that street. His career wasn't just ending because of a mistake. It was ending because the truth had been revealed, and the truth was not on his side. And as the truth spread, the world began to see what had really happened. Not a mistake, not a misunderstanding, not a justified act, but a moment of bias turning into violence. A moment that would not be forgotten. The moment the truth went public, the situation changed forever. Not just on that street, not just in that neighborhood, but across the entire system that had allowed the incident to happen. The evidence was clear. The recordings were everywhere. The story was being shared in real time. And the officer's attempt to control the narrative had failed. Inside the police department, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The word traveled fast, not through official channels, but through the same networks that had captured the footage. Everyone knew what had happened. Everyone knew it wasn't just another traffic stop gone wrong. The officer who had fired the shot was escorted into a separate room. His hands were cuffed behind his back, not because he was violent, but because the department needed to maintain control of the situation. It was a symbolic gesture, a sign that the department was taking action. But action was not the same as justice. The internal affairs team began their investigation immediately. They collected statements. They reviewed body cam footage. They looked at the phone videos that had been shared online. They interviewed witnesses. Every detail was examined. And the more they looked, the more the truth became impossible to deny. The officer had no justification. There was no threat, no provocation, no reason that could explain the choice he made. The department's leadership knew this. They also knew that the public would not accept a cover-up. The evidence was too strong. The cameras had captured everything. The world had seen the moment. So the decision was made quickly, not out of mercy, but out of necessity. The officer was placed on administrative leave. His badge was taken. His weapon was removed. His access was restricted. He was no longer a symbol of authority. He was now a symbol of failure. But even as the department acted, the community's anger continued to grow. Protests began forming, not in anger alone, but in demand. Demand for accountability. Demand for transparency. Demand for change. People marched with signs. They chanted in the streets. They refused to be silent. They refused to let the incident fade into another forgotten story. The media picked up the footage. News channels replayed the moment again and again. Social media exploded with opinions, debates, and outrage. The story became a headline. And with every replay, the officer's mistake became more undeniable. The officer's family received calls. Friends sent messages. Some were supportive, but many were not. The weight of the incident reached beyond the officer's professional life. It touched his personal life, too. He had built his career on the idea of authority and control. He had trained for years. He had earned commendations. He had taken pride in his uniform. But in one moment, all of that was stripped away. The department's internal investigation was not the only consequence. The legal system began moving as well. The district attorney's office opened a case. Charges were considered. The evidence was overwhelming. Witness statements matched the footage. The officer's own words contradicted his actions. And the public pressure was immense. Lawyers and legal experts began analyzing the case, predicting outcomes. Some believed it would lead to a conviction. Others were more cautious, warning that the system could still fail. But the truth had already been spoken. The truth had already been recorded. And once truth is recorded, it becomes harder to deny. Meanwhile, Bruce Lee was recovering in a hospital. He was alive, but the pain was real. His body was healing, but the emotional impact was deep. He had always been known for his strength and discipline, but this incident proved that even the strongest can be targeted by bias. Despite the pain, Bruce Lee remained composed. He knew that reacting with anger would only feed the narrative that the officer wanted to create. He chose a different path, one of strength, patience, and focus. He spoke to reporters once he was able, not to provoke, but to share his truth. His words were calm, powerful, and clear. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said, "but this is not just about me. This is about a system that allows prejudice to become violence." His statement resonated with people everywhere. It became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that strength is not only physical, but also moral. As the legal process continued, the officer's career was already over. The badge he once wore proudly was now a symbol of disgrace. His reputation was shattered. His future was uncertain, and the world watched as the consequences unfolded, not just for the officer, but for the entire system that had allowed him to believe he could act without accountability. The truth had been revealed, and now the system had to respond. The moment the officer's badge was taken, the world began to change. Not instantly, not dramatically, but in a way that would echo long after the incident. The street where the traffic stop happened became a symbol, a reminder that authority can be dangerous when it is fueled by bias. The officer was no longer a man in uniform. He was now a name in a report, a headline, a story. His career ended not because of a single mistake, but because the truth revealed something deeper, a pattern of prejudice that had been allowed to grow. He tried to defend himself, to explain his actions, to justify the moment. But every explanation was drowned out by the evidence. The cameras didn't lie. The witnesses didn't lie. The truth was clear, and the truth was simple. A racist officer had crossed a line. Bruce Lee recovered slowly, physically and mentally. The injury healed, but the memory remained. He didn't speak often about what happened, because he didn't need to. The world had already seen it. The world had already decided. Yet, Bruce Lee did something more powerful than speaking. He continued living. He continued training. He continued teaching. He continued moving forward. Because that was the real message. Not revenge, not anger, not hatred, but discipline. The world needed to see that even in the face of injustice, strength could remain calm. Power could remain controlled. And truth could remain undefeated. The officer faced legal consequences. The district attorney filed charges. The case moved forward quickly, driven by public attention and undeniable evidence. His career was over, but his life was not. He would now face a different kind of judgment, one that couldn't be dismissed by a badge. The internal investigation revealed more than just the shooting. It revealed how bias can poison a system from within. It revealed how authority can be used to harm rather than protect. It revealed the truth that many people already knew but were afraid to say. The officer was suspended, then fired. His name was removed from the force. His reputation was destroyed. But the story didn't end there. The incident sparked a conversation, a national conversation. People talked about accountability. They talked about reform. They talked about the need for transparency and training, not just for officers, but for the entire system that supports them. The community organized rallies, not only to protest, but to demand change. They demanded better policies, better training, better accountability. They demanded a system that could protect everyone equally. And while the officer's career ended instantly, the impact of his actions continued to unfold. Bruce Lee became a symbol, not because he was a celebrity, but because he represented something deeper. He represented strength in the face of hate. He represented the idea that truth is stronger than prejudice. He represented the belief that discipline and dignity can outlast violence. In the end, the officer's career ended on the spot, but what happened next mattered more. It wasn't just the end of a career. It was the beginning of a change. And in that change, the world began to understand a powerful truth. Power without discipline is dangerous. Authority without accountability is destructive. And hate, no matter how hidden, will always reveal itself eventually. The officer's name faded from headlines, but the lesson stayed, because when truth is revealed, it never truly disappears.